Some of you know that for about the first 10 years of my life, I lived in Greenwich Village in New York City. Did some of you know that? Now you're like, oh, that all makes sense now about her. Now, the building where I lived was originally built in the 1870s as a cold storage warehouse. And my father and a few of his friends purchased it in the 1970s and turned it into a cooperative apartment building. Now, there were a lot of really unique aspects of living in a place like that. But one was that instead of being a walk-up, we actually had an elevator in our building because they had previously used that elevator to bring product up to the upper floors of the warehouse. And then when I lived there, people up to their apartments. So that was really great, but it presented a couple of challenges, including the fact that there was kind of a large gap between the elevator platform and the ledge at the entrance to every floor. Like, it wasn't big enough to fall down. It wasn't dangerous, but it certainly was big enough for certain small items to drop through it, most especially keys. So it was like not a common occurrence that somebody would be coming into the building, getting out of the elevator with their keys. Maybe they're holding a bag of groceries. Maybe they had a wiggly child at their hand, and they would drop their keys down the gap at the edge of the elevator and into the abyss below. Now, the reason I, as a child who didn't even have any keys, was so acutely aware of this problem was because my father was one of only 2 people in our building who got called whenever this happened. Like, just now and then our phone would ring and some really anxious person on the other end would say, I dropped my keys in the elevator again. And my dad would have to go down there into the pit and get them. And actually, this was a 2-person job. So one person would go to some upper floor of the building, call the elevator up to that floor, and then physically hold the door open while somebody else ran down the stairs to the basement, jumped down into the elevator shaft, got the keys, and climbed back out, all while just hoping and praying that the person up above didn't get tired or bored or go to answer the phone, right? Now, even as a child, I could tell this was like really serious business. Like, it wasn't difficult and wasn't often, but it was serious to be down there in that pit. When I would talk to my father about it years later, he would describe what it was like down there. He would say it was just dark and filthy. It was dripping with oil down all the walls from the elevator cables. He used to say, there's no place more like Sheol, which is the Jewish concept of the underworld. There's no place more like Sheol than that elevator shaft. He said it was 9 feet down, but it felt like 100, at which place my mom would always break in and say it was actually more like 5 feet. But who's counting? They both agreed that it was just really risky business, and that the main point was to get in there and get whatever was lost and then get the heck out as soon as humanly possible. Which makes me think a lot about our Easter story this morning. You know, we heard Courtney read from the Gospel of Matthew, which I hope maybe you noticed is like the most dramatic telling of the resurrection that there is in all the Gospels. Like, if there were a 90s made-for-TV movie about Jesus' resurrection, it would be from Matthew. Because it's not subtle at all. There's nothing left to the imagination. It's not like, oh, hey, the stone rolled away and Jesus' body isn't there. I wonder what happened, right? No, it's all there with a lot of special effects for emphasis. An earthquake, the guards passing out from fear, a voice booming from the heavens, do not be afraid. Jesus is not here, he has been raised. This is my message. Courtney, I thought you were going to do a little voice for that part, but you didn't. Next year, you could do the voice. I mean, it's a really wild story, and often when I read it, I get caught up in those funny details. But I want to tell you about something that I noticed this time that I hadn't heard before, and it's about the women who were there. Like, all this totally wild stuff happens, and they are so freaked out that they just skedaddle right out of there. Did you notice that? Like the earthquake and the angels and the guards and the stone, and it turns, and then they say, Jesus is risen, and the ladies run away. Did you hear what Matthew said? He said, so they left the tomb quickly with fear and joy, and they ran. And suddenly Jesus met them. And I have to tell you, that last part really got me. You know, running away with both fear and joy from the tomb. I don't know about you, but that is so clear to me. When I think about running with fear and joy, I know what that looks like. I can imagine just what that feels like, right? Like, we got to get out of here. Is this true? I don't know. What do we do? I don't know. We got to get out of here. And I notice that it's actually while they're running away, while they're still in motion, that Jesus appears to them. It's not before at the tomb, at the first moment of the revelation. It's not later when they're talking to all the male disciples about what happened back at the ranch. It's while they're on the road, being propelled forward by their fear and joy, that the risen Christ comes to them. And that just seems really important to me because I kind of feel like that's what we're doing right now. Like we're just trying to get the heck out of Dodge as soon as humanly possible and flee this grave that the world has become over the last 13 months. And we're joyful, right? There is hope on the horizon, but we're also still filled with fear. And so the promise that this could be the very moment that Jesus comes to us is really something I want to grab hold of. You know, it also comforts me to know that the fact of Jesus rising didn't take away the women's fear. His reappearance did not wash the stench of death off of their clothes. It did not wipe the traumatic memories of the crucifixion from their minds. It did not repel the threat of the Roman state. But what Jesus rising did do was fuse those fears with a certain type of hope, one that propelled them forward, away from the midnight of their despair and toward the coming dawn. And that really speaks to me because I'm not interested in an amnesiac spirituality that asks us to forget what's happened. I'm interested in a faith that can make of that awareness new possibilities, which is what I hear in this story from Matthew this time. You know, the women went to the grave to do the work of grief, and in this spectacular and strange series of events, they're offered an exchange, an invitation to do an even harder task, which is the task of hope. And they run away with that treasure. They run away from the tombs that would bind them forever to their loss. It's like I can just see them. They take up their skirts and their spices and their fear and their joy and they run. And in that mad dash away from the forces of death, they find the risen Jesus. And I really think we can too. I think that's our word of hope today. That whenever we run away from the forces of death in our own time, even if our fear is great, and our joy only newly born, that the living God can come to us. Like when we run away from the forces of sickness that have kept our world bound in grave clothes this past year, every mask and every air hug and every shot in the arm, both acts of fear and of joy, are opportunities for the living God to come to us. I think when we run away from the forces of bigotry and hate that seek to keep us forever walled off from each other, whether we fear for our lives or fear about our own complicity, in pairing that fear with the joy that reconciliation is possible, the living God can come to us. I think when we run away from the forces of despair that would make us ready to embalm this planet and its unhealth, fearful for its future, but joyful at the same time for its majesty, I think the living God can come to us. I think we can think about that in our own lives. Whatever tomb would ensnare us, we can feel our legs begin to strengthen and our hearts beat harder as we make our way away from that thing and toward the rising sun, knowing that in both of our fear and our joy, the living God can come to us. I think that's where the resurrection is for us, where it was for those first disciples. in learning that the God had reached down into the pit of death and there by the great power of love snatched back the treasure of life. And I know that this is a mystery beyond our comprehension, but I don't think it is beyond our vision or our experience. I think we can see it even now if we but look along the roadside as we run toward the dawn. I think we will find it is here with us right in this moment, and that we can take hold of it and greet it. So those are my Easter invitations to you this day, friend. I hope you can experience the power of the resurrection as you receive this story and see it in your own life. So I dedicate these words in the name of the God who created, redeemed, and sustained us always. Amen.